Hey everybody, Steven here, and today looking at performance with the new ROG Ally in Destiny 2. With this, I will make sure that I have everything labeled in terms of the resolution and the performance that I'm getting out of this. The cool thing here is their performance metrics. Destiny usually doesn't allow you to use anything like Afterburner, for example, and you can't really run it on the Steam Deck without hacking the Steam Deck itself in order to play Destiny, so you couldn't use their performance metrics if you weren't going to use some type of hack to actually play the game, because you can't download the anti-cheat software that Destiny requires for you in order to play the game. With that being said though, the draw here is the custom CPU that the ROG Ally has from AMD, the Z1 here, and then the 120 Hz screen. So when I open up the menu and you're actually hitting 120 Hz, this thing looks incredibly smooth. The downside is it doesn't really have the power with this to run the game, whether that's at the like 720p that this runs at or the 1080p, it just doesn't have the power in order to hit those numbers. So with this, I will showcase, hey, I'm running this at 28 watts, which is the full power, and also at 15 watts. What's that difference going to be between those two wattage outputs, and then also the difference between 720p and 1080p, because it's the only two resolutions that you're going to get. So there isn't an 800p, you don't get 1200p, you don't get those high resolutions that you find on like the One X Player 2 or some of those other devices. Also with this, I'm going to the moon, and I'm going to, I believe it's Harbor's Sorrow here, because this has the most kind of chaotic stuff going on with it. There's just a ton of enemies on screen, you're playing with other people, and I wanted as much chaos to show you, if you push this hardware, what can it do? So I'm bringing up the command center right here and showing that I'm using the 25 watt turbo mode here, and I have the AMD RSR on, the Radeon Super Resolution. With that, I haven't noticed a massive difference, maybe like 1 or 2 FPS with this, with it being on compared to off in terms of the increase that you might see. I don't know if there's some stuff that needs to be adjusted with Destiny 2 or driver updates, whatever it may be, in order to improve that over time, but hopefully down the road we may see an improvement on this. But with this game, we're only getting, like I said, 1 to 2 FPS on the increase. The settings here, I have everything on low with this, and then just confirming the 720p here. Low settings, you're not going to see a huge jump in visual fidelity if I move it to medium or high on this necessarily. You'll see a little bit of an increase, but it's not a massive increase, so it's just better to keep most AAA games on low settings for the performance here. Now, looking at the performance, so we got 720p, 28 watts. The FPS range is 38 to 50 with the snippet that I'm showing here, and then the average out of that is 44 FPS. This was holding consistently 41 to 44 in terms of the FPS that I was seeing. So it's just kind of the range it would stick with. And then you would get those outliers, right? It may jump to 50, it may drop down to 38, but in general, it was holding 41 to 44 pretty consistently, and I'm pretty happy with that. Now, the temperature here is staying in the 60s and 70s, so it does really good on temps. Excited to see that. The battery at the bottom, you see just the battery life go down over time, and then how much it's actually utilizing. And obviously, if you're doing the 28 watts, you're going to drain the battery much quicker. So we're looking at about an hour of gameplay with this, compared to if you drop down to the 15 watts, you can get an hour and a half to 2 hours of gameplay out of the device, which I think most people are going to opt for that, because that's the whole idea behind the handheld, is that it is very portable with this. Now, shifting over to the 15 watt mode, you'll notice, and this is why I think most people would opt for that, the FPS in terms of the range is still 38 to 50. The average is 44 still. It held 41 to 43 pretty consistently. So just that adjustment in 1 FPS in terms of the range that I was seeing consistently. I've also played this for a couple of hours now in different game modes, and I've adjusted it back and forth between the 25 watts and the 15 watts. At that point, I'm noticing about 1 to 5 on the difference between the 15 watt and the 25 watt. So in general, 25 watts, you get about 1 to 5 more FPS on average than you do with the 15 watt range. But again, you're getting that huge increase in the battery life. So the trade-off is really going to be up to you. Shifting over now to 1080p at 25 watts, we have the FPS range with 26 to 51. The average out of that is 38. I saw that it was holding 31 to 33 pretty consistently with this. And that also depends on where you're going. So one thing I was looking at is I have to be in combat, right? I have to be, because if I leave combat right now, you're going to see the FPS range increase just like you would on a PC, right? But in combat, it's interesting where sometimes I'll see these momentary spikes, and I think that's where you're just seeing this higher range at 51. There was just almost like a fluke. It just kind of hit that momentarily. I was still in combat, which is why I counted it, but this is where you do see this pretty broad range in terms of the FPS that you will see. But again, what is it holding consistently? Consistently in combat, 31 to 33. Now shifting over to 15 watts, the FPS range was 27 to 36. The average out of that is 31.5, so 32. It was still holding 31 to 33 in terms of the range that I was seeing consistently, which is pretty awesome. So it seemed like I didn't get any peaks that were higher that I was seeing with the 25 watts, but it was still in that same general range. And again, it was holding there pretty consistently, which is pretty awesome to see. Personally, 1080p, it's lower FPS in general. And with this being a first-person shooter, I would rather have the smoother gameplay. So I've been opting to play 720 at 15 and 25 watts when I'm playing this just on my own personal time, and I think it plays great. The power just isn't quite there like compared to the One X Player 2, where I can play that at 1080p and still get a much higher average in terms of the FPS in that mode. So with this smaller screen anyways, because the One X Player 2 is a 8.4 inch screen, this is a 7-inch screen, I think it looks great and still plays really smooth at 720. 1080p obviously is going to look better, but again, that trade-off I think for most people just isn't going to be worth it. Now the next part here, I'm just leaving through this tunnel out of this area, and you see that the FPS is low. Now this is 1080p at the 15 watts. I'm going to jump it up to the turbo mode, and you're going to see an increase. The interesting part here is, yes, we're going to get an increase in FPS. We're going from the 30s to the 50s, right? But the second I cross like this threshold and I go over back into the area that I was just at, that Harbor of Sorrow, you're going to see the FPS drop because there's more going on in that zone. So once that area just kind of loads in, immediately we see this drop. So we were in the 50s, boom, 36, right? Shifting over now to 720p here. My thought being, it's like, okay, I was going to show when there's not as much going on, are we going to see a difference? I'm leaving now. So you see high FPS because there's nothing going on. I'm sitting right at the edge. And then as I go this way, it's all good. Turn around, come back, and we see a little bit of a drop again. But it just depends on where you're at in the game. And that's why some of these videos where they showcase the average, right? They just give you the stats really quick. There's a lot more going on. Where are you at? What's the gameplay? Outside of just the, hey, what's the watts gonna be on it? What's the resolution? What's the graphical settings? There's all these other factors in that. And that's why I mentioned earlier, I played this on my own. And in terms of the 720p, 15 watts, I was getting generally like the low 40s when I was running like a Vanguard Strike or something like that. If I was running it at the 25 watts, it could be low 40s, but it could bump up into the upper 40s or even low 50s. Again, the difference there was about 1 to 5 FPS between the turbo mode, the 25 watt mode, and the performance mode, which is the 15 watt mode. Across the board, upper 30s to upper 40s is the range that I would say you're usually going to have. Now, running some of the seasonal content where there's 6 people there, and that also depends on your internet connection, right? I could see low 30s, right? maybe there's just so much going on screen. I see that for a couple seconds, but then again, it starts going back up, and then it's generally the upper 30s, low 40s, and that can creep up into the upper 40s, maybe even cross that threshold. It can be in the 50s for a little bit. So with this, I think the performance 720p is just obviously the prime spot. I mentioned that earlier, but I'm quite surprised at what this can pump out. And with this being a lighter handheld than the other ones that I have, especially the One X Player 2, and although the trade-off, again, the smaller screen, I'll take the smaller screen because it is smaller in my hands, it's lighter, and the controls here feel really good. This is the closest to the Steam Deck out of all the handhelds that I've tried, and that still has the best comfort. It's in terms of just the feel of the buttons and everything, it's still the best, but man, this is a very close second here. And I think that is what the combo of all of it makes it a really good handheld for Destiny 2. Again, just in my opinion, but I want to hear from you guys. What do you think of the performance here with Destiny 2 on the new ROG Ally? Do you have any questions about this also? Let me know in the comment section and I will make sure to answer that for you there. If you guys like the video, hit the like button for me as it helps the channel out. If you want to continue to follow along with all my content, hit the subscribe button for me. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.